Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Paradise Games sort of deck list feature here. I'm here with Nathan, our resident Blue Moon pilot. I'm sure you guys have seen him on stream rather frequently, demolishing people with his patented blue burn style here. And we decided to go ahead and pull him aside and talk to you a little bit about your Blue Moon list. You've been playing the deck for a long time. I'm sure you've got a lot of really interesting opinions with the deck. And I think that people who are aspiring Blue Moon players out there probably have a lot to learn. So why don't you take me through your general thought process with the deck, how you've come to the list you're at, what you're happy with, your strengths, weaknesses, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So in general, the way I play it, like you said, I play it in this blue burn sort of way, which the way I see the deck is it's much more of a tempo deck than a control deck. Where it has all these counter spells, but it's much more about just pinging your opponent down just piece by piece as much as you can. Drop, just get a bolt to the face, a few hits with a Snapcaster Mage, and then maybe one good swing in with a thing in the ice at the end.
Yeah, for sure. And that is definitely a little bit counterintuitive when you look at a deck list like this. I think for a lot of players, and myself included, honestly, I'm definitely willing to admit this, is when I look at a deck with Jase the Mind Sculptor in it, I usually assume that my plan is going to be like, okay, we'll win the game with this Jase the Mind Sculptor, or we'll win eventually. We've got Jase the Mind Sculptor. I'm usually not on playing like bolt my opponent's face with this Jase the Mind Sculptor or whatever, but like when you're using Jase the Mind Sculptor as, an advantage to really kill your opponent, close out a game, you're essentially admitting that you're lacking a lot of the powerful real control finishers like, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, or the crit, like essentially huge numbers of counter spells. You do have some cryptic commands, obviously, we see here, but you're trading that for advantage in tempos with cards like Lightning Bolt, Archmage's Charm, Vendilion Clique, Brazen Bar, things like that. So the damage does matter.
Yeah, exactly. And so the way I see the Jase is it's basically, it lets me pivot into the hard control plan if that's what the hand allows. If I end up with just a ton of counter spells and just curve into the Jase real nice.
Yeah, it's going to be nice to have,
then I can just go play hard control if that's what I want. But otherwise, if I've got a solid lead or just some good stuff going, I can play the Jase and get some value with the Brainstorm, draw some cards, set up my hand perfect to flip a thing in the ice.
Absolutely, yeah.
I believe it was on stream a few weeks ago, it might not have been, where I brainstormed a Jase, picked up a Bolt, a Serum Visions, and a second Bolt, and I had a Mystic Sanctuary and a Snap in hand, which allowed me to bolt 4 times in the same turn,
dear Lord.
and then swing a Vendilion Clique.
That sounds like lethal to me.
My opponent was at 15, and I was like, dude, can I assume you don't have responses? And they're like, sure. And I'm like,
kill you. Kill you. Yeah, so definitely a sort of departure from, I think, even Blue Moon lists in the past, because I think a lot of the Blue Moon decks, a little bit ago, back when the deck was certainly a more popular archetype, this was before the deck really had Thing in the Ice, before the printing of Brazen Bar, where, we still had Vendilion Clique, but, this was a long time ago, back when Blue Moon, was a very prominent and popular modern deck, and it's sort of, taken a backseat to other powerful cards and decks like Urza, Primeval Titans into the spotlight right now as well, and all that. So it's definitely evolved while it's been under the radar, it sounds like.
Yes, and then there's a lot of different versions of it too. I play a much more threat heavy version than the standard version. A lot of people do play a very control, like just lock down the game, win with your Jase, or your Ral is Viceroy or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Or like there's no threats other than Thing in the Ice and Snaps, just no Brazen Bars, no Vendilion Cliques, no Planeswalkers, things like that. It's in a weird position as a deck because it's not as good at control as Blue White. It just isn't. Blue White just has better control than it. It's got and then its threat being Celestial Colonnade, much more resilient than Thing in the Ice.
Certainly.
And just a lot of just things like that where it doesn't do that as well. So playing it like a control deck, playing it like the hard control deck is just trying to lean into that just doesn't bring up what potentially you can do with the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm assuming that you've gone through those iterations, those trials and tribulations. You've been playing this deck for a long time. How long?
I picked it up. What was that? Around a bit before Modern Horizons came out. I
So that's
believe
been a little over, or around 8 months at this point, so quite a while.
About that. I believe I dropped. I played Bridgevine originally, and Modern Horizons spoiler season came out, and they dropped Hogak in the spoilers, and everyone was at the time. Everyone was like, Hogak, it's just this big dumb 8/8. It's going to do nothing. But everyone who did Bridgevine at the time was like, that's going to be stupid.
That's going to be absurd, yeah.
And I was just like, that's going to get this deck banned. I'm going to pivot into something else I want to do.
As soon as my deck's good, just jump ship.
And I was like, no, it's too good. It's tier 0. I'm out. So I went into this at the time. So I played this for a bit. Then they spoiled Archmage's Charm, and I was like,
yeah,
perfect.
Archmage's Charm is great. Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite cards in this deck.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go a little bit into those specific card choices. We've already talked a little bit about the Cryptics, the Jases. You mentioned Archmage's Charm. Why don't we talk a little bit about the function utility that brings?
Absolutely. What what it allows me to do, if you don't know the modes, it's draw 2 cards, counter spell, or take control of a non-land permanent CMC 1 or less. The most relevant thing on there, things would be the counter and the draw. What's really nice is it lets you hold up a counter spell during your opponent's turn, and if you don't end up needing it, you just draw for value. Just get 2 more cards.
Just cash in your nice instant speed divination. Yeah,
exactly. Instant speed divination, turn 2, perfect, beautiful, love it. Even better if you can Mystic Sanctuary back to the top, because then you draw it again, and it's a counter spell. Your opponent knows you have a counter spell, but if they don't do something worth countering, it means that you're now up more cards.
It puts them in the immediate bind, which a lot of decks are famous for putting you in. The damned if I do, damned if I don't type. Well, if you have a counterspell, I'm in trouble. If you have cards and I don't play anything, I'm in trouble. I think the most recent and popular iteration of this situation was the fourth turn of the game against the Simic Flash decks that were popular in Standard very recently. If you cast a spell and you got hit with like a Frilled Mystic, you felt really, really far behind. If you didn't cast a spell and they cast a Night Pack Ambusher, you felt really, really far behind. And that's like really the bind that a lot of the Seth Manfield and his team used to really storm Mythic Championship 7, I believe it was, the Arena Mythic Championship rather recently, and that deck kind of took off after that. Obviously, Standard's gotten some new sets since then. Oko's gone and all that, but still, that Archmage's Charm is the one card bind.
Exactly. It's like you said, the damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. That's one of my favorite things to do with this deck, is force you to do one thing or the other. Where it's you can cast a spell and do a counter spell just to make me not draw 2 cards, and I still get my value out of that, because and that's and there's a number of other things like that. If we want to just go into the Blood Moon.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of my favorite things with the Blood Moon is, particularly because people know me up here for playing Blood Moon, people will just play around the Blood Moon, which is almost as good as playing a Blood Moon.
Sometimes they just screw themselves out of mana, yeah.
Exactly. You're like, okay, I'll fetch for my basics, and it's like, cool, and you just don't have double lands now. I'm good with this
fine, yeah.
Also, yeah. And then just secret thing I do that people don't always realize is I almost always side out the Blood Moons, because you're going to play around them.
Everyone plays around Blood Moon in Game 2 every time.
Exactly, and I can reliably just take them out, because sometimes if it's really good, like if it's Titan or something like that.
Yeah, Primeval Titan being pretty consensus the best deck in the format, by a lot of people right now, means that Blood Moon certainly earns their spot in the main deck, and obviously are the best card in the sideboard. They're never going to leave, but
that's the big reason that I went for a time. I was thinking about taking the Blood Moons out, and then Titan, then some bands. It was there were some bans that all happened all at once, and
and the new sets dropped, and Titan really exploded on the scene.
Skyrocketed back up to the top, and I was like,
Blood Moon's in.
Blood Moon's in. It's still in. E-Tron's still good. Tron's around.
Tron's always going to be around.
Exactly. It exists. It's still around. Blood Moon's good against it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just forces you to either play around it or gamble that I'm not going to play it.
Yeah, which is always usually a losing gambit. So
exactly.
Moving on here, we've got a rather new additions here in the form of Brazen Bar. This is a card that's really been taking formats by storm, just plural. Seen a lot of play in Standard, seeing a lot of play in Pioneer, seeing a lot of play in Modern, seeing a play in Legacy rather consistently as well. This card is excellent. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about it here as well?
Oh, that card. So that was one of my favorite cards. It was when I saw Archmage's Charm, like I said earlier, I was super excited.
Yeah.
And then it took a while, then they dropped Brazen Bar, and I was like, that's going in the deck, something's coming out for it. I didn't know what. At the time, basically the list was more or less the same as I run now, with maybe some counts that are a little different, but at the time I ran 2 Magmatic Sinkholes in the main. And I dropped them for the Brazen Borrowers. The reason being is the Brazen Borrowers are more removal.
Yeah.
Because they bounce a thing. It's not permanent, but it's removal
but if we're playing this tempo game, the bounce your thing for long enough to kill you is a removal spell.
Yeah. Bounce your thing, holding up a counter spell, now you can cast it into my... turn 2, bounce your thing. You have to gamble that I don't have Archmage's Charm turn 3, and if you don't play into the Archmage's Charm, I can then flash into Brazen Borrower.
Yeah, and then you put them in the bind immediately again. And Brazen Borrower basically, once again, is that, 1-card bind here. So, by the time you have 3 mana, it looks like you're really putting opponents in a really tough spot of you need to play around everything, and it's so hard to know what to play around.
Yeah, it's basically just another modal spell, which is great, because it's...
Absolutely.
And even better, it's because it's not an enter the battlefield ability like Vendilion Click, it triggers Thing in the Ice.
Oh, yeah, that's lovely.
That was the big selling point for me, is it's not just like a cycling effect or something like that. There's a lot of cards with cycling that's I would really love to put this in my deck, but that doesn't trigger Thing in the Ice.
Doesn't do the thing
I can't snap it back. I can't Mystic it back.
Absolutely.
Which, granted, I can't do those 2 things with Brazen Borrower, but at least I can hit one of those 3.
Absolutely. So, we have the one of Vendilion Click. That one's still hanging around.
That one's, looking at other people who play this list, that one's not a super popular choice, but the looking at your opponent's hand to take something out of it, or occasionally your own hand when you've just got,
just real bad cards.
When you've got the Irrelevant Blood Moon.
Yeah, get it out of here.
It's okay, I don't need the Blood Moon. I want literally any other card in this deck, even a land.
Yeah. Totally.
Something I can put on the battlefield feels good.
And also, something that's worth noting is additional copies of 3-power flying attackers usually get better once you have other copies of them. The first one, if you have 1 Vendilion Click in your deck, the 3/1 body often doesn't matter as much because your plan isn't as focused around killing your opponent, but the more aggressive your deck slants, the better the actual bodies of the Brazen Bar and the Vendilion Clicks get when you have, multiples of them, because then you can start to really pressure your opponent and, put the clock on the combo decks or, force your opponent to interact with you at your time, which matters quite a bit.
Exactly. And with back to the Brazen Bar, the other thing that was really nice with the Brazen Bar is because there's more of those bodies.
Yeah.
That still kind of spells, but because there's more of those bodies, it means I can throw them at my opponent more. Whereas when you've only got 7, 8 threats in the deck,
it's much harder to do that.
You play against blue-white control, the path 4 of your cards, there goes...
Yeah, now we're in trouble, yeah.
It's cool, I have basically no threats. Whereas now it's it's only 2 more, but that's 2 more things they need to get rid of.
Yeah.
Where it's I can play this when I know you've got the bolt, and it's are you going to use your removal spell here?
Yeah, we'll see. Speaking of threats, moving on to Thing in the Ice, I see 3 copies here. Thing in the Ice, certainly probably the most problematic card for most of the aggro decks coming in against your deck, and it's definitely a wall that'll also win the game. Multi-versatile, very, very good card, just against pretty much all of the aggressive creature decks.
Yes, that one I think it's really pretty straightforward. It's it's a wall. It's 0/4. It's a wall. It bounces the board. It's a board wipe in the main. It's your win con in the main. It's a 7/8. It's
great, obviously.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the number 3 to me. Why did we land on 3?
3. So the way I see the numbers of cards in the deck is 4. You want to see this in your opening hand, and you want multiples of it throughout the game. 3. You want to see 1 in this game.
Yeah.
2 is you want to see at least 1 at some point, but you don't really care when. It can be super late. 1 is if I see it, awesome. If I don't,
it's fine.
It's fine.
So
Thing in the Ice, you don't generally want to see it in multiples. Occasionally
Absolutely.
getting a second one is good because you can do kind of a staggered, like, have one on 3
Yeah.
counters, one on 4 counters, and then take them down, bounce the field, your opponent rebuilds, bounce the field again. Things like that, but in general, seeing the second one just...
One's a good number a lot. Yeah, especially because the second thing in the ice doesn't help flip the first thing in the ice, so you'll get yourself in an awkward bind sometimes.
Yeah, where it's
where
like-
you've got 2 thing in the ices and no spells to flip either of them, and then it feels pretty bad.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. And one of the other things I got, thing in the ice, is its ability to... You can pull some really interesting combination plays with it with Snapcasters and Brazen Bars.
Oh, yeah.
Because Bouncer Snapcaster, that's another, if you had a second Bolt in the yard or another counter spell that you need to hold up.
Nice value, yeah.
You've got again, you can do things like bounce something with Brazen Bar, keep it in exile for a while, cast it into a one counter thing in the ice, then bolt your opponent, bounce it back to your hand. Now you've got a bounce spell again.
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah, you can just do these combination plays with, because all of them, you've got either spells or enter the battlefield effects.
Yeah, lots of built-in synergy is really the thing that I'm taking away from the threat package here is everything's meant to synergize together. We've got, powerful spells that are synergizing in relevant ways. And speaking, on that, we've obviously got our 4 copies of Snapcaster Mage. Anyone who's been playing Modern at all in the last, forever, basically, is going to be used to the Snapcaster Mage. I don't think we really need to talk too much on the power of Snapcaster Mage.
Not too much, other than, I mean, there is the controversial play as
The controversial Ambush Viper.
Yeah, the controversial Ambush Viper turn to just, I'm going to hit you with Snapcaster. I'm not even going to cast something. I don't care.
You're a big fan of the Ambush Vipers in this deck, which, if you haven't seen a lot of Nathan's matches, I recommend going and checking some of the pod VODs out on YouTube, just because you can see quite a bit of Ambush Viper from Nathan, and I like it rarely, but he does it and he wins a lot. So I'm probably just wrong, and I've gone on record saying this, that, I feel like I'm just wrong, but every time I just, die a little when I see Snapcaster Mage for no value, I just, get sad, because I'm just man, it could have been so much more. There's a cryptic command in your graveyard, and you just, snapped it an Ambush Viper. I'm it hurts.
It felt really bad the first time I did it at first, but it got me there. The first time. But just to give you the quick reason why is, if you, for Snap Bolt, for example, playing a Snap on turn 2 and hitting them twice by turn 4 is just as good as Snap Bolting them on turn
Certainly,
5.
yeah.
Or it's better than it. You get 1 more damage.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, you kind of have to guess on that value. Sometimes it's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not like you were casting Ambush Viper every time here.
No.
It's probably still only 15% of the time or something, maybe even 10% of the time, but still, that's probably quite a bit higher than most people's Ambush Viper percentage.
Basically, I just think that people get too focused on that ability on Snapcaster. It's like, oh, you can flashback anything, but it's like, no, it is a 2/1 body, and that's not...
Sometimes you just need a 2/1, man.
It's not irrelevant. The thing is, if you can lock your opponent down, just hitting them with a 2/1 just gets there.
Absolutely. 2 remands in the deck as well. This speaks a little bit to the tempo plan. 2 is less than I would expect to see. Why are we at 2?
I was at 3 for a long time, actually. I recently, just before the Portland Grand Prix that I went down to, I went down there and just played in the side events and the PTQ. I believe I switched to the Archmage's Charm. I switched out 1 remand for 1 Archmage's Charm. Just before it, I had just been really falling in love with Archmage's Charm, the looping it with Mystic Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Just looping those, and just getting the value of drawing cards, occasionally getting to steal the Death Shadow, things like that. And I was
Absolutely.
I think I'd rather see one of these every game than I would a remand. As good as remand is, I love remand. Remand lets you pull some nice, remand your bolt again for thing in the ice.
It's got some great stuff. Yeah. It can get really tricky. Most of the time, you're just casting it on turn 2 and buying time to hit your land drops and whatever, obviously.
Yeah, you get the tempo on turn 2. Yeah. It's great against control. You bolt one of their threats, they counterspell it, you just remand your own bolt to fizzle their counterspell.
Yeah, it's excellent, yeah. So, remand, a good inclusion, but apparently maybe getting outclassed as the great cards just keep getting printed.
It's tough, because, I mean, I want to run 3. I just don't know what comes out.
There's only so many cards. Yeah,
exactly.
There's only so many slots, and yeah, like
there's 60 cards.
We've been talking. There's all these excellent new cards. I mean, we glossed over Force of Negation. Force of Negation's a must, obviously.
That needs no explanation.
Yeah, when there's decks like Neobrand in the format, you just need some Force of Negations, and with the Brazen Bar, which the Archmage's Charms, obviously we're not cutting any Snapcaster Mages.
No.
It gets something has to go, and
yeah,
Remand is one of the cards that is non-essential.
Yeah, Remand it's good, but it's one that it's the placeholder for what I sideboard in. I'll sideboard in the relevant specific counterspells rather than this just perfect generalist one that buys me a turn.
For sure. And then looking at our 1 mana spells here, we got most of the glue of the deck, 4-opt, 4 Serum Visions. We got a couple main deck Spell Pierces and a Spell Snare. Those are the ones that stand out to me. I don't think we need to go too much into ops, Serum Visions, Lightning Bolts, or anything. Serum Visions, draw cards. Let's one lander be capable, which does nice. Matter, and obviously we have Thing in the Ice in our deck, so we need our cheap spell count to be rather high.
Exactly, flip the Thing in the Ice. But yeah, the Spell Pierce, Spell Snare. The Spell Pierce is actually not a popular choice. A lot of people will be doing mana leaks instead of Spell Snares or Spell Pierces, sorry, or an additional Spell Snare. I've seen plenty of different ones in place of the Spell Pierce. I really enjoy that Spell Pierce, just the turn one blowouts where you just go Island Pass and you've got the opt and the Spell Pierce in hand. If they do something, just
put them in that same bind that we've been talking about, just straight from turn 1 even.
Yeah, really, they play like a Traverse turn 1, something like that.
No, Amulet of Vigor.
Exactly, they're relying on that turn 1 play where it's not in and of itself too impactful.
Thoughtseize, Inquisition of Kozilek, there's even like Neoform. Neobrand talked a little bit about that.
Exactly.
Can you imagine getting Spell Pierced on turn 1 playing Neobrand?
Feels bad.
I cannot. Like, Gastless Allosaurus Rider, alright, Eldritch Evolution, Spell Pierce that. Let's go to the next game.
Cool, you sacrificed your creature? Cool.
Yeah,
I'm good. Yeah.
Nice 8 for 1, idiot. Like, I can't even count how many cards up I am. And then the one of Spell Snare, I'm a big fan of 1 Spell Snare and just like all of my blue decks in Modern.
It's so good.
It feels like every time I draw it in my opening hand, my win percentage goes from like 50% to like 70%, just like every time. And like, I hate drawing it later, but I love that. I love having it in my opening hand.
It's just so relevant.
Yeah.
It hits Tarmogoyf, Snapcaster Mage, Devoted Druid, Vizier.
There's very few decks in the format that don't have great Spell Snare targets. Unfortunately, I think the best one is the Amulet Titan deck, which unfortunately is probably the best deck.
It's what Sakura Tribe Elder I think is.
No.
Or Tribe Scout, sorry.
That's a 1 mana spell, so it just
what am I thinking of?
Doesn't hit it. You're thinking of Sakura Tribe Elder.
Am I? Okay, yeah.
But most of the Amulet Titan lists don't even play that.
Oh, is that out of the deck? So, yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's like Once Upon a Time and that's it. I think is basically the only hit in the deck, but
boom,
regardless...
Got your Once Upon a Time, turn 1, got him.
Yeah, you can board it out there, and it is great.
It's
in your opening hand in most matchups. So this is Nathan's take on Blue Moon. Thank you so much for joining us, Nathan. I highly recommend all of you aspiring Blue Moon pilots out there take some notes on this. He's been crushing people with it lately, and it's making Blue Moon look like people maybe need to stop ignoring it. So we'll see you out on the field casting some more Ambush Vipers and bolting people's faces. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.